Welcome to Future Epoch, where we learn more about our world. Imagine losing the ability to move your hands. Every thought remains sharp, every intention intact, but the body no longer obeys. For millions of people living with paralysis, spinal cord injury, or degenerative disease, this is not a thought experiment. It is their daily reality. Now imagine a device, smaller than a coin, implanted beneath the skull and listening to the electrical signals your brain produces whenever you intend to move. No wires threading through the skin, no external sensors taped to the scalp, just a silent, wireless connection between your thoughts and the world around you. In January 2024, that device became real. A 29-year-old man named Nolan Darboh, paralyzed from the shoulders down following a diving accident, became the first human being to receive a Neuralink implant. Within weeks, he was controlling a computer cursor using only his thoughts. What had seemed like science fiction for decades had quietly become a clinical milestone. But Neuralink is not alone. The technology is older than most people realize, and the questions it raises go far beyond any single company or any single moment. A brain-computer interface, or BCI, is any system that creates a direct communication pathway between the brain and an external device. The concept sounds futuristic, but the underlying science has been developing for more than 60 years. The basic principle is straightforward. Neurons communicate through electrical signals. Electrodes placed near or within brain tissue can detect those signals, and with the right software, they can be decoded and used to control computers, robotic limbs, speech synthesizers, or almost any electronic system. There are two broad categories. Non-invasive BCIs sit on the surface of the scalp and pick up generalized electrical activity. Invasive BCIs require surgery to place electrodes inside or directly on the brain, capturing much finer and more precise signals. The trade-off is clear. Invasive systems perform better, but they carry the risks of any brain surgery. For decades, BCIs were confined to laboratories and small clinical trials. The technology was real, but it was cumbersome, expensive, and far from ready for wider use. That is now beginning to change. The earliest serious work on brain-computer interfaces began in the 1960s and 1970s, when researchers started exploring whether the electrical signals in the motor cortex could be used to control external devices. These were proof-of-concept experiments, but they established the foundational principle that would drive the field for generations. By the late 1990s, the research had progressed significantly. In 1998, a team at Emory University implanted the first intracortical device in a human patient. The subject, locked in by ALS, learned to move a cursor on the screen using only his neural signals. It was a landmark demonstration, but it remained a research curiosity known mainly within the scientific community. The BrainGate Consortium, formed in the early 2000s and involving Brown University, Massachusetts General Hospital, and several other institutions, became one of the most important drivers of the field. BrainGate trials demonstrated that patients with paralysis could control robotic arms, type text, and operate software using implanted electrode arrays. The results were published in journals including Nature and stood as compelling evidence that practical BCIs were achievable. In parallel, researchers began exploring less invasive approaches. Synchron, an Australian-American company, developed the Stentrode, a device delivered not through open brain surgery but through a blood vessel. A stent-like electrode array is threaded via the jugular vein and positioned inside a vessel adjacent to the motor cortex, recording neural signals from inside the brain without requiring any incision in the skull. In 2021, Synchron completed the first human implantation of its Stentrode device in the United States. By 2023, patients were using it to browse the internet, send messages, and operate smartphones independently, all without lifting a finger. Neuralink, founded by Elon Musk and a team of neuroscientists in 2016, took a different approach. The company developed a surgical robot capable of inserting arrays of ultra-fine, flexible electrode threads directly into brain tissue, with far greater precision than human surgeons could achieve by hand. After years of animal trials and regulatory review, the FDA granted Neuralink approval to begin its first human trial in 2023, and the first implant followed in January 2024. The technology works. That is now beyond serious dispute. But the questions surrounding brain-computer interfaces are becoming more complex the further the technology advances. The first and most immediate challenge is longevity and reliability. Early electrode arrays often lose signal quality over months or years as the brain's immune response surrounds the implant with scar tissue. Neuralink reported that some of the electrode threads in Arbol's implant retracted shortly after surgery, reducing the number of active electrodes. The device continued to function, but it highlighted that long-term stability remains an unsolved engineering problem. The second challenge is the regulatory pathway. The FDA has been cautious and deliberate in approving BCI devices, as it should be. Brain surgery carries genuine risks, including infection, hemorrhage, and neurological damage. Gaining approval for a device intended to remain inside the skull for years, perhaps for a lifetime, requires standards of evidence that are genuinely difficult to meet at this early stage of development. The third challenge is perhaps the most profound: data privacy and ownership. A brain-computer interface, by definition, reads the electrical activity of your brain. That data includes far more than cursor movements. Researchers have demonstrated that neural signals can reveal emotional states, cognitive patterns, and intentions that a person may have no desire to share. Who owns that data? Who can access it? What happens if a company is acquired, changes its terms of service, or simply ceases to operate? These are not hypothetical concerns. Several jurisdictions, including the state of Colorado, have already begun extending privacy legislation to cover neural data specifically. But the legal frameworks remain far behind the technology, and the stakes are higher than in almost any other domain of personal data. For the people who stand to benefit most directly, these devices represent something close to a revolution. Patients with ALS, spinal cord injuries, or locked-in syndrome can regain meaningful independence, and with it, communication, creativity, and social connection that had seemed permanently out of reach. Clinical trials have shown patients typing at rates approaching natural speech, controlling wheelchairs without assistance, and interacting with family members in ways that have been lost for years. Beyond paralysis, researchers are investigating BCIs for epilepsy management, treatment-resistant depression, and restoration of memory function in patients with Alzheimer's disease. DARPA has funded programs exploring applications for accelerated skill acquisition. The scope of potential applications, given enough time, is extraordinary. But the risks extend well beyond the individual patient. A world in which neural interfaces are commercially available raises serious questions about cognitive inequality, about whether enhanced individuals will gain advantages in employment, education, or competitive environments that others simply cannot access. When does a device that helps a paralyzed person communicate become a device that makes a healthy person faster, more focused, or more productive? And who decides where that line is drawn? The history of brain-computer interfaces is not a story about one company or one dramatic breakthrough. It is a decades-long accumulation of scientific effort by researchers at universities, hospitals, and laboratories around the world, most of whom will never appear in a news headline. What is new is not the underlying science, but the engineering ambition. The miniaturization of electronics, the development of surgical robotics, advances in machine learning for signal decoding, and the involvement of well-funded private companies have collectively brought BCIs to a point where clinical use is no longer a distant aspiration. It is happening now, in operating theaters and living rooms, in the daily lives of people who once had no options left. The critical thing to understand is that this technology is morally neutral. Whether it serves humanity well or poorly depends entirely on the decisions made about access, regulation, data governance, and oversight. The science is ready for a serious ethical conversation. Whether society is ready to have it is a different question. We are in the earliest chapter of a technology that could fundamentally alter what it means to be human. The first generation of brain-computer interfaces is already restoring function to people who had lost it. The next generation will almost certainly be more capable, more durable, and more widely available. The deeper question is not whether this technology will become part of human life. It already has. The question is what kind of world we build around it, whether we design systems governed by democratic oversight rather than the priorities of private companies, whether we protect the privacy of the most intimate data a human being can generate, and whether access is shaped by medical need rather than by wealth. Every era of transformative technology has arrived with promises and with dangers, and this one is no different. What is different is that this technology operates inside the brain itself, the seat of identity, memory, emotion, and everything we recognize as the self. The decisions made now about research, regulation, access, and ethics will shape not just a product category, but the next chapter of what it means to be human. The question worth sitting with is not whether we can do this. It is whether we are ready to do it wisely. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this content and want to see more, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel.